A former city official recently pleaded guilty in federal court to charges of bribery and tax evasion. This happened only 5 weeks after a guilty verdict on federal corruption charges against 2 aides to Mayor Walsh. Prosecution of that earlier case resulted in a protest by a majority of the city council, but the more recent case has prompted a call for new measures against corruption, mismanagement, and waste. The purpose of an inspector general is proposed by our guest, and we'd like to welcome the president of the Boston City Council, Andrea Campbell. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilman.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
First of all, I looked at the inspector general as a reaction to that more recent case, and there are so many other things about this case we're still trying to figure out. What made you say it's time for this inspector general?
First of all, it's an idea that I have been thinking about for some time. I go to sometimes conferences with other councilors or council presidents from across the country, and in some other cities they have an IG. So, for example, Chicago as well as Baltimore. And in the wake of some of the recent incidents around zoning and the bribery conviction, I felt like this would be a good time to bring up the idea and to go for it. I got a lot of questions, of course, from my constituents, my residents, about all of the recent news, and they have questions around development and what it means for development projects that were approved in the past and what it means for development going forward. But for me, the position is about not just someone who can be proactive, not always reactive in looking at possible corruption, waste, mismanagement, but also someone who can be transparent, separated from the political waves of City Hall, separated from the council, separated from the mayor, and can be not just proactive, but independent in ensuring that there's transparency around these issues and accountability. And so I'm excited for the possibility of creating this in the city of Boston.
I've heard a lot of these complaints about development process in Boston. All the candidates have, I'm sure. But it sounded to me more like it was mismanagement, that community groups weren't being heard necessarily than it was that somebody was bribing or paying off people.
Right. I mean, the Lynch conviction recently shocked everyone, including the mayor. And based on everything that I've learned thus far, it doesn't look like the mayor knew that this happened, had any knowledge of this. So it's a shock. But I think it's an opportunity for us to look at how do we actually make sure that our processes that we put in place to ensure transparency, fairness, accountability in the zoning process, our budgets and accountability processes for funding for the school department and other departments, how do we make sure that they're being implemented well, that they're actually having the intention that we want, which is to make sure that our money is being spent efficiently and effectively. And I think we need someone to be looking at that around the clock. Right now, we have various commissions that do pieces of this. My hope is that an inspector general will not just cover financial stewardship responsibilities, also look at the possibility of corruption. If people have complaints, they can bring those to this person. Also look at waste. If people think some department is spending too much money, okay, let's have someone look at that. And the goal is, if this person is consistently looking at this from a proactive space, then we have good government, good governance. And so I'm excited about this, and I just filed the ordinance. We'll have a hearing at some point in the council to explore it with residents in the community as well.
This is someone who might be investigating a mayor's administration or even city councilors. So
that's right.
How do you make sure that person is independent?
So I've been looking at, there's a lot of best practices out there because this position exists in many states, 34 states across the country. Some are at a state level. In some instances, it's at the state level, the county level, and the local municipality level. I know we have an IG here in the state. Right now, based on what I understand, the IG isn't looking at any of these issues that I just talked about. This is why I think it's important to have someone who is at the local level, locally governed. And so in the best practices that we have seen, sometimes it's an appointment by the mayor, sometimes it's an appointment with the mayor and the council. I want a mix of the mayor, the council, and the community, so an advisory board. And right now, the draft proposal says an appointment by the mayor, an appointment by the city council president, an appointment by the chair of the Council's Committee on Ways and Means, as well as a public application process that will allow participants and residents of the city of Boston with relevant experience to apply to be on this advisory board to appoint this person who cannot be removed but for cause. And this person would be separated and independent, not beholden to me as council president or anyone else that's council president, to the council, to the mayor, separately accountable to the people and the residents of the city of Boston to make sure that their taxpayer dollars are being spent well, and to ensure that we actually have good governance happening in the city of Boston.
From what you've seen in other cities, how do these inspector generals get their ideas about what to look into?
Many of them it's complaint driven. So people are, for example, fielding complaints to an office. But there's also audits that this person is able to do, or this office is able to do. They're also able to show up in various departments, review books, those kind of things. So it varies across different municipalities. So it could be a combination. I envision this person having extreme authority and power, frankly, to ensure that all of us are being held accountable, that the money in which, particularly around the funding, taxpayer dollars, that doesn't come up much. But when you think about when we are assigning cases to outside counsel, for example, and I still don't know all the numbers with respect to how much we're paying legal counsel to do these investigations, some of that money could possibly be saved if we have an inspector general who is doing some of this work, who has that experience, or at least has a criteria that is made public as to when we engage outside counsel for something, or when we have to engage law enforcement, for example. You know, this is a public matter that should be investigated by a public entity, and that should be transparent and given updates to the public. And that doesn't happen when you go to a law firm. So this is another way of getting at transparency and accountability, as well as good governance, and possibly saving resources.
Of course, a lot of the way the city runs are these minute approvals and licenses and permits that people need to just run a business. Do you see that changing in any way with an inspector general?
Possibly. I mean, I imagine Inspector General could look at the permitting process for opening a business. And we get those questions all the time, particularly as a district councilor, whether it is, I have an existing business and now I want to sell certain products in store, and my original permit, does it cover that? You know, looking at what are the current practices and policies we have, and then how do we review those, keep those up to date, so that they are not only efficiently run, but that the resident, the user, the person looking to open a business or have a development project done in their community, or someone who is new to the game, right? A new developer, for example, who does not necessarily know how to navigate the system, who doesn't have all the relationships, but is really great at what they do, who wants an opportunity. This Inspector General could really look at the policies and practices to ensure that it's truly fair, and that getting things done in the city of Boston do not just involve relationships with who you know within government, who you give a contribution to, that it's fair and equitable across the board.
This is BNN News. We're talking with City Council President Andrea Campbell. One more question, Councilor. You have an event coming up. It reminds me of something I enjoyed way back in the 1970s, some free jazz in Mattapan.
Well, 1970s, I mean, we were still enjoying that music today. Yes, we have, it's the first, and I hope the first annual event, the Mattapan Jazz and Unity Festival. I'm doing it in partnership with Ron Savage, who is the Dean of Performance at Berklee College of Music. It is this Sunday at the Foley Residence, the Greens on River Street, behind the Foley Residence, right near Mattapan Square, from 1 to 5, completely free, open to everyone in the city of Boston, an opportunity for folks to come and visit Mattapan and see what makes this community so wonderful, so rich. It's where I live. Many of the artists we're featuring live in this community. You would never know that Mattapan has such a richness if you look at some media reports. It's not just about violence. Here you have people who love each other, who connect with one another, and this is a way to celebrate those residents with jazz.
And in fairness to the age, these are artists I heard just within the past few years in Roxbury, and they're very up to date.
That's right. So thank you for allowing me that opportunity.
Thank you very much for being with us, City Councilor Andrea Campbell. In a moment, we'll talk with a candidate for City Councilor at large, but first, this message.